This is the Steam controller. Wait, not that Steam controller. This is the... No, that's the Steam Deck. Let's try this again. This is the Steam controller. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, but that's still just a box. This is the Steam controller. There we go. This is the latest piece of hardware from Valve, and I think it's going to be a lot like the Steam Deck, but not in the way that you think. I think it's going to be a lot like the Steam Deck because there are going to be people that absolutely 100% are going to love this thing. And there are also going to be a bunch of people that can't see its value. And you know what? Both of those groups are right, because this is a controller that can do some of the wildest things that you can think of, but at the same time, it can't do some of the basic stuff that you might want to do. So let's talk about this thing. Full transparency, Valve did send this to me for free, but no money changed hands. I will say that other reviews that you've probably seen, those reviewers have had this controller for weeks at this point. I've had mine for hours. I stayed up all night testing this thing, but this is a first impressions video with a full review coming down the line, as well as a bunch of tutorials. So subscribe if that's something that you want to see. Okay, first of all, if you're used to the Steam Deck, this feels almost identical. And I don't mean the buttons and trackpads, though those are almost identical. I don't mean the curve to it, but again, it feels very Steam Deck-ish. I mean the plastic. It's a matte black plastic with glossy finishes on the D-pad and the buttons and the triggers and the joysticks. I've definitely felt better plastic in the past, but this is pretty good, and if you like the feel of the Steam Deck, then you're going to be fine with the feel of the Steam controller. Before we talk about the inputs, let's talk about the comfort, because this layout is really weird looking, but somehow it works. My thumb can easily move between the thumbsticks and the D-pad or the face buttons with no adjustment for my hands, and reaching the trackpads only requires a slight adjustment as to how I'm holding the controller, but it works. I thought that I would struggle to reach the triggers when I'm using the trackpads at the same time, but I don't. I think that the overall comfort of the controller is top-notch. But the shape is also really strange. Like I said, I haven't had this for an extended period, so my thoughts may change after I have more experience with it. But I was playing Celeste, and when I was using the D-pad for movements in the game, there's this spot right back here where my left middle finger was like resting. And as I was pushing those D-pads, I was also pushing back on this part of the controller at the same time. And after playing Celeste for, I don't know, like an hour and a half, I started to get pain right here on my middle finger. Not enough that it made me want to stop playing, but enough that I was like, oh, well, that's very interesting. Now, it is possible that I might get used to this over time, or maybe I need to adjust my grip. It's a weird shaped controller, and every time you get hands-on with a new controller, there's always slight adjustments that you have to make in order to conform your hands to the shape of the controller. Let's talk about the D-pad. First off, it is a bigger D-pad than the one on the Steam Deck. It's not by a lot, but you can definitely see it, and you can feel it. Now, the D-pad on the Steam Deck was kind of mushy feeling, and it worked fine, but the feel was bad. And it was bad enough that I ended up modding my Steam Deck to add micro switches, so it's super clicky now. I don't think that that's something I'm going to need to do with the Steam controller. It is a rubber membrane D-pad, but it feels pretty good. I wouldn't say clicky, but it feels satisfying to press. And when you roll around on the outside of the D-pad, you can feel the cardinals snap. Playing a platformer like Celeste, the D-pad is great. It felt precise, it felt snappy. I never felt like I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. I fired up one of the best Contra clones out there. It's called Iron Meat. If you haven't played it, you absolutely should. And I fired it up so that I could see if there were accidental diagonals. To do this, I press down on the D-pad and then I wiggle my thumb back and forth to see if my character starts moving. If they do, that means I'm getting accidental diagonals, which does happen. I've done this test on a bunch of different controllers. I feel like the D-pad on the Steam controller is somewhere on the middle of the spectrum for this test, with nonstop accidental diagonals on one side of it and zero accidental diagonals on the other side. It sits firmly in the middle of that line. Next up, I wanted to see how it dealt with rolling inputs. So I jumped into Marvel vs. Capcom Collection and was playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And I have to say up front, I'm terrible at fighting games, so much of this could be skill issues. Now, I had no problem firing off Hadoukens, But Shoryukens, I had a really hard time. I would say I was successful about 30% of the time. Overall, I would say that the D-pad is a huge improvement over the D-pad in the Steam Deck. It's good, but it's not great. If you're really into platformers, you're probably good. If you're into games where the D-pad is like a weapon selector or something like that, then you're probably good. If you want to play fighting games as like your main way to play, it would definitely take some getting used to, and some people might not make it. So definitely think about that before you pick one up. Moving on to the face buttons, they're also rubber membrane, and they feel about the same as the D-pad. They are larger than the buttons that are on the Steam Deck, which is good. And if you compare them to the buttons on the original Steam controller, they are absolutely massive. They have a rounded top to them, and they don't seem to have any wobble. Personally, I prefer face buttons to have more of a flat top to them, but these feel pretty good. One thing I like is how close together they are. This does make it more likely that you're going to hit the wrong button from time to time, but in games that I like to play, like Monster Hunter, where you regularly have to hit, multiple buttons at the same time, like A and X or B and Y, well, you're much more likely to nail those because the buttons are so close together. The menu and view buttons, or start and select if you're really old like me, they are the softest feeling buttons. Those aren't buttons that you're hitting all of the time, so I think that they're fine. The quick access menu button on the bottom is the one that feels the most hollow. It certainly isn't a deal breaker, but it definitely feels different than all of the other buttons. I'm not worried that it won't work. It just feels different. Next up, let's talk about the Steam button. It feels fine, but overall, I think its placement is pretty bad. When I reach my thumb over to press it, the rest of my thumb, like the knuckle area of my thumb, ends up touching the right stick. On SteamOS, this wasn't really a problem. At least I didn't notice it was a problem. But on Bazite, which is running on my main gaming rig, this would bring up a mouse cursor for a moment and would basically invalidate the input that I was trying to push. I ended up having to make sure that I was really reaching over the thumbstick to make sure that I didn't touch it at all when I was pushing the Steam button. And I think that they would have been better off having the Steam button down closer to the quick access menu button instead. Moving on to the bumpers. Man, are these a massive improvement over the bumpers on the original Steam controller. And I would say they're a marginal improvement over the Steam Deck. On the original Steam controller, when you press the buttons, it felt and sounded hollow and cheap, but these feel great. They actuate when you press with just your fingertip or if you use your whole finger like I do, and they're really, really responsive. The triggers are decently long and they have plenty of throw. They feel smooth and they have enough resistance that it feels pretty good. They're glossy and smooth. I kind of wish that they had a texture grip to them, but I don't think that my finger is going to slip off of them or anything. I just think it feels more premium when you have a textured grip. When you compare them to the DualSense or Xbox controllers, they definitely have fewer features as far as the triggers go, but I've definitely seen worse in many other controllers. These triggers are good enough. Moving on to the sticks, you can see that Valve has continually changed the stick shape that they have used for their hardware. The first Steam controller had a rounded top, which is my least favorite Steam stick cap ever. The Steam Deck has almost a trapezoidal shape to it, and then the new Steam controller has a nice rounded edge, which reminds me a lot of like an Xbox controller stick, but it's got this nice little concave scoop that your thumb sits in really well. And inside that scoop is something almost no other controller has, and that is capacitance. Basically, the controller knows when you're touching the stick, and you can use that in Steam Input to do all kinds of cool things like activate the gyro or double tap to sprint. I'm going to have a bunch of videos coming up soon that are showing off all the cool things that you can do with this controller, so subscribe if that's something you want to see. The sticks are TMR, which stands for tunneling magneto resistance. Most sticks that you use are potentiometer based. This means that you have two things that are rubbing against each other, which wears down over time and can cause drift. These use magnets, which means nothing is rubbing and you're much less likely to develop drift. Valve is so confident that you're not going to be developing drift with these that they soldered the sticks to the PCB. The dead zones on the sticks feel pretty good, but you can adjust them in Steam Input on a game-by-game basis if you'd like. Clicking in on the sticks for L3 and R3 feels great. just enough pressure is needed, and I don't feel like I've ever done it by accident. The trackpads are on this little shelf below the sticks. When I use them, I do have to reposition my hands slightly in order to use them, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable at all. They're slightly bigger than the trackpads that are on the Steam Deck, and they're at a weird angle, but ergonomically, they feel great. They have haptic motors underneath, which lets you feel your mouse moving around. It's almost like it feels like a trackball. And the best way to really understand how to use them is to fire up Aperture Desk Job, which is a free game from Valve that came out alongside the Steam Deck in order to show off all of its features. Well, the controller has all of the same features as the Steam Deck, so you can use this game in order to learn how to use your controller. Last night, I ended up playing through a mouse-only game called And Roger. The combination of the trackpads and the gyro made it super easy to play. And I think it opens up a bunch of game types to the TV that otherwise I just wouldn't ever bother with. You can also use the trackpads to do all kinds of wild things like having menus on them or restrict a mouse to a certain portion of the screen. But I don't want this video to get too long, so all of that stuff is going to be in separate videos coming out down the line. Since we mentioned the haptics, we might as well talk about Rumble. This is the first hardware from Valve, as far as I know, that has Rumble built in. The original Steam controller had haptics, but didn't have Rumble motors, and it felt pretty bad, as the Rumble was just, it wasn't Rumble. That's what it was. It was not Rumble. And they did the same exact thing on the Steam Deck, where they had haptics, but no Rumble. In this one, they have two haptic motors that are underneath the trackpads, but then they also have two Rumble motors that are in the handles of the controller. This means that it's supposed to have HD Rumble. I don't know how to test that and verify it. When I pulled a trigger in a game, when it started shooting guns, I felt Rumble, and I was like, okay, yep, it's Rumble. Around the back, we have our 4 rear buttons, which when I hold the controller, my middle fingers and ring fingers land right on top of them. In my testing, I have hit them by accident a few times, but not enough that it would drive me crazy or make me wish that they weren't there. I think overall, they feel good, and you know exactly where they are without thinking about it because you can feel where they are. I think I'm going to be using these a lot, although personally, I don't need 4 of them. 2 is just fine, but for everybody out there who uses 4 buttons on the back of their Steam Deck, they're going to be really happy with 4 buttons on the back of a Steam controller as well. Also on the back of the controller, we have this invisible capacitive strip that senses if your hands are on the grips. This is what Valve calls grip sense, and there is a lot that you can do with it right now. I have to say, personally, I'm struggling to see its use case that would be useful for me as a user. For the most part, Valve has focused this on a way to temporarily disable gyro so that you can reset your hand positions, which is great, but I just can't get used to it. And maybe it's because I've built up too much muscle memory with capacitive sticks or capacitive trackpads, and that I just don't feel the need to have the grips in there as well. But it's great that it's there, and maybe we'll come up with really cool ideas for how we can utilize this down the road. Back here, you also have your charge pins, which magnetically attach to the puck. So all you have to do is set your controller on top of it. The puck jumps up and starts charging it. Whenever I go over to pick up the controller, I usually just use my middle finger and I push on the puck and it falls off the controller as I'm picking it up. Works really, really well. The puck is not just a charger, but it's also a dongle so that you don't have to use Bluetooth. Now you can use Bluetooth, but you don't have to. This puck means that you have very low latency. I don't have the equipment to test the latency, but Gamers Nexus did, and from what I understand, they were very impressed with the latency for this. You can connect the puck to up to 4 different controllers at the same time, which is great because this means you're not going to have all of your USB ports taken up by a bunch of different controllers. It's just one port that will give you 4 controllers, which is great. I think the thing that sets the Steam controller apart from pretty much everything else out there is the fact that Valve designed the Steam controller with repairability in mind. It's easy to get into, there's like 7 screws to remove, and all of the PCBs and ribbon cables are clearly labeled, so if you can take it apart, you can put it back together again without having to wonder, where does this piece go? So without going into a full tutorial, I want to show you a few of the things that the Steam controller can do. So first off, if I press X in Hollow Knight Silksong, that is my attack. If I jump and press X, it's just still a jumping attack. It's nothing special about that. But if I push jump and then down and attack at the same time, you can see that my character does this forward dash, which is actually really, really important. But you have to hit both of these buttons at the same time, and it's tough to do that. So what I did is I bound those two buttons to one of the buttons on the back. So now if I am on the ground and I push that button, everything works the normal way. But if I'm jumping, I can now just pull this button right here with my middle finger. What is it? It's R4. If I jump and push R4, my character does that dive bomb attack. If I want to do a regular attack, I could just push X instead. It's this kind of customization that makes Steam Input, in my opinion, one of the best things that Valve has ever put out. Another thing that the Steam controller can do is you can use the trackpads in order to bring up menus. So if I touch right here, you can see that we've got our menu popping up on the screen. And thanks to the haptics that are the haptic motors that are underneath these trackpads, each time I go from one button to the next, I feel it under my thumb. Like I can actually feel like there's another button there. And so as I go between them, I can feel that. And then when I hit the one that I want, I can let go and have that execute the action that I want. It's a really cool feature that allows you to play games that otherwise would be completely unplayable on a controller. Another thing that you can do with the Steam controller is you can set it so that instead of pulling your left trigger to aim down sights, if maybe you have too many inputs and you want to double up on your inputs, I can put the right trigger to both aim down sights and also fire my gun at the end of the pull. So I can pull it just a little bit and it engages. And then when I want to actually shoot the gun, I just pull it the rest of the way and then the gun shoots. Well, that's just a few things that you can do with the Steam controller. There is a lot more that this device can do, but I don't want to get into it in this video because I don't want this video to be too long. Next up, I want to talk about what this controller can't do. At least it can't do right now. I would never recommend anybody buy something based on what they hope it can do in the future. You should buy based on what a device can do right now. However, I would have to point out that the launch of the Steam Deck was half-baked. It was awesome, but it had miles to go, and Valve was clearly building that plane in the air. I fully expect to see huge improvements over time with the new Steam controller, but right now there are a few things that the Steam controller cannot do, and they may or may not be deal breakers for you. First up, Windows users. Using the new Xbox mode, which Microsoft recently put out, you can wake your Windows machine from sleep, which is awesome. The controller is essentially a mouse and keyboard, and if you wiggle your thumb on the right trackpad, it's just like wiggling a mouse and your PC wakes up. But then with the new Xbox mode, you can't put in your PIN because this is a keyboard and mouse, it's not a controller. It is possible to use the accessibility menu in order to bring up the software keyboard and then put in your PIN that way, but that's slow and it's a pain in the ass and definitely a downside to using this as a controller in a living room on a Windows device in a living room setting. And speaking of waking, currently the Steam controller doesn't wake my Steam Deck. It doesn't wake my Bazite PC. According to Google's AI slop, it is supposed to be able to wake those things, but it just doesn't. I tried multiple times and it just would not work. If anybody's watching this has a Steam controller and yours is able to wake your stuff, let me know in the comments down below, that like button, because I would love to know what the hell I'm doing wrong. This is obviously going to be a niche case because most people aren't going to be plugging their controller into a bunch of different devices, but every single time that I connected the Steam controller to a new system, I was forced to do the update again. It's not a big deal, it only takes a couple of moments, but it was weird that I had to do a firmware update after I had just updated to the latest firmware. However, I will point out that it is very important that you actually do that update, even if you've already updated the firmware when you've connected to some other computer. Here's why. If you don't, you're going to get double inputs for some reason, or at least that's what happened to me. I'm not sure what the reason was, but every single time I would push a button, it would push that button twice. So if it says, hey, you've got some new firmware, do you want me to install it? Just say yes. Don't assume because you've already installed the latest firmware that you're all set. Again, most people are only going to plug this into one device and then just use that one device, but I just thought it was weird that that was happening. Next is something that it can't do, and I don't think it ever will be able to do. It can't fix the issues with games that don't handle multiple input methods well. For example, I was playing Arc Raiders, and when I use the trackpad as a mouse, the glyphs switch over to keyboard inputs instead of controller inputs. I also had problems shooting, like the guns wouldn't shoot the way I was used to because I was using a mouse and a controller at the same time. This was solved by switching the left and right triggers to be the right and left click on the mouse. The glyphs still flash back and forth, but this let me aim the way that I wanted to. I was really hoping I would be able to be in controller mode, and then when I bring up my inventory, use the trackpad to quickly manage my inventory, because that's when you're the most vulnerable in that game. But it doesn't work in this game. Trying to touch the trackpad at any point while I am in controller mode, it doesn't work as a mouse. So it has to be considered a joystick, and that means you can't use it to manage your inventory, which is really annoying. But these kind of problems are game problems, not the fault of the controller. Valve has extensive documentation for developers as to the best practices for making games work well with the Steam Deck and now Steam controller. If devs don't follow those guidelines, you will run into issues like the ones that I was just talking about now. This may or may not be a deal breaker for you, depending on how much tinkering you are willing to do when it comes to playing your games. Also, this controller is compatible with just one thing: Steam. It's a Steam controller. If you don't want to use this with Steam, don't buy this controller. You're just going to be disappointed. If you want to play games that aren't on Steam, you can add them to Steam very easily. But if that sounds like a hassle to you, then again, don't buy this controller. Nearly every third-party controller that you can buy out there is able to be used on pretty much every piece of hardware, with PlayStation being the odd one out that restricts things. But the Steam controller won't work on an Xbox. It won't work on a PlayStation, certainly not. It won't work on a Nintendo Switch. It won't work in any game not launched by Steam. There are workaround solutions to that last part, but if you want it to just work, you better be ready to use Steam, because this is not a controller. It is a mouse and keyboard in disguise, and without Steam input, it's pretty much useless. Moving on from the software, here are a few of the hardware features that I wish Valve had included in this new Steam controller. Number one, I would love to be able to easily swap out the D-pad. I very much prefer disc-shaped D-pads to cross-shaped D-pads. I've seen controllers a lot cheaper than this with the ability to swap out a D-pad, so I know that that could have been an option. Maybe Valve chose not to just because of the size and shape of the controller, and they couldn't quite squeeze the mechanics in order to swap out D-pads. But that's something I would have liked to see. And speaking of swapping, I would like to easily be able to swap out the sticks for sticks with longer throws. I personally would not use this feature, as I find these sticks to be the exact right height for me, but I know plenty of people that prefer to have a longer stick on the right side of the controller that gives them more precision with aiming. Now, somebody might say, well, you could just use gyro for that, and that's awesome, but if you're somebody that doesn't like to use gyro, again, the ability to swap out sticks would be something that would be really welcome, I think, on the Steam controller. Moving on from the sticks, let's talk about the triggers. The triggers are great, but I think that they could be better. The original Steam controller has an amazing feature that lets you soft pull the trigger and have that count as one input, but then at the end, there's another pull that has a satisfying click to it. You can still do this in Steam input, like you can fake it, but it doesn't have the same physical feedback that the OG Steam controller does. I didn't expect to see this in the controller because they ditched it when they brought out the Steam Deck, but I was really, I had my fingers crossed that they were going to bring that feature back. But since they didn't do that, I would have liked to have seen trigger stops then. When you're playing a shooter, you want your triggers to feel like mouse clicks with very, very little travel. Again, you can fake this in Steam input by setting it as a hair trigger, and it works well, but it doesn't have a physical stop, and you end up with this post-actuation travel that just feels off, and I don't like that. It's not any different than a default PlayStation controller or a default Xbox controller in that post actuation travel either. But it, again, I would have liked, like, Valve has a good solution already. I've seen great solutions with trigger stops. I don't understand why they don't want to include that in this. Next up is probably the biggest miss on this controller. The lack of a headphone jack is just wild to me. It doesn't affect me because I have wireless headphones that I use whenever I play with friends, but I think most people would have loved to see a headphone jack for audio pass-through and microphones on this, because without that, I don't know, it just seems weird. Why would they not include that? Now let's talk about the price. It's $99. I've seen a lot of back and forth on Reddit arguing over whether or not this is a good price or not. I think it comes down to if you view this controller as a standard controller or as a premium controller. It's expensive for a standard controller, but it's cheap for a premium controller. I'd say it's somewhere in between a standard controller and a premium controller, and the price reflects that. For me, I'd like it to be cheaper, but at $99, even though I already have one that I got sent to me for free, I'm going to be buy one when the orders go live on Monday. What do you think about the Steam controller? Let me know in the comment section down below, and if it's your first time here, please subscribe. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching. Stay rad.